In this lesson, we're going to continue factoring, but the difference in this lesson, which makes it a little bit more challenging, is that your first term, which we call the A term, is not 1. We'll actually have a coefficient. So it does change a little bit of the way that we are factoring. But once you get the first part, the second part is just what we've already been doing. So one of our last lessons was factoring by grouping, where we grouped 2 binomials. We factored out the GCF for both, and then we were able to put those together for our final answer. There's one step prior to that in this lesson. So give yourself about 3 or 4 problems, and then you'll get the hang of it. Okay, so I don't have my pens. All right. So in this first one, the first step is you want to make sure that your trinomial is in order from greatest degree to least degree, and that is the case here. There may be some on the back where they're not, or maybe not. Maybe I didn't put any in here. And then if you can't, you're going to factor out a GCF. So the first thing you always want to do is you want to check your trinomial to see if there's a GCF. And in this case, there's not. So we can move on to step 3 up here. Step 3, you're determining the factors of the product of the A, C, which is your first and third term, that add up to the second term. And what that means is you are taking 3 times 2, which is 6, and you're finding factors of 6 that add up to 5. That's not, the only thing that's new is that instead of just looking at the third term, you're looking at both the first and the third term, okay? So when I factor out 6, I get 1 and 6 and 2 and 3, okay? So they both can equal 5, but because we have to have it a product or factors of a positive 6 and a positive 5, then 2 and 3 are going to be our 2 factors, okay? 2 times 3 equals a positive 6, and 2 times 3 equals a positive 5, or 2 plus 3 equals a positive 5. So this is the one place where it's different. When you write this out, you're going to take your 2x squared and you're going to bring it down. Okay. Then you're going to split your 5x into 2 parts, a 2x and a 3x, because if you think about it, 2x plus 3x gives us 5x, and that's what we need up here. So plus 2x plus 3x, and then we're going to bring the 3 down here. Okay. So you're basically bringing that trinomial down, but the only difference is you're separating your 5x into 2 terms that add up to 5x, okay? All right. Then what you're going to do is you are going to group them together, and you're going to solve like we did on our last homework assignment, okay? So any questions about that step right there? Okay, so in reviewing factoring by grouping, we've grouped 2 binomials together, and we're going to factor out the GCF from both of them. So the GCF here is 2x. And when we write this factored out form, we have 2x times x plus 1. Okay. So are there any questions on that part? Okay. When we factor out the other one, we can factor out a 3, and it is a positive 3. Okay. And when we reduce those, we get x plus 1. Now, remember, when we're factoring by grouping, you want to make sure that these 2 that we factored out are an x plus 1. All right. So, and then these 2 right here, 2x plus 3, is a binomial on its own. So our final answer here is 2x plus 3 times x plus 1. Okay. Are there any questions about that? Let's go ahead and do example 2 together. Okay, this time we have to find factors of 3 that give us a -4. Okay, so they have to multiply to get a +3. This gives us a +3, but when we add these together, it does not give us a -4. All right, so if we make them both negative, -1 times -3 gives us a +3, and -1 plus -3 gives us a -4. So -1 and -3 will be our two factors. Okay. All right. Once we do that, remember, we're going to bring down our trinomial into a polynomial. We're just going to separate -4 into -1x and -3x. So we have 3x squared, and then we're going to have 4x separated into 2. So we're going to do, I'm going to put my -3 first, minus 3x, and I'm doing that to show you that it really doesn't matter which one you put first. And then I have a -1x, and then I bring this one down, plus 1. Okay. And now I'm going to group my two binomials. Any questions so far? Okay. Let's go ahead and factor out our GCF in the first binomial. It's going to be a 3x. And then in our second binomial, because there's a -1 in the first term of this binomial, we're going to factor out a -1. Okay. But notice there's a positive in the first term of the first binomial, so I just factored out a positive. Okay. So let's go ahead and rewrite this. We have 3x is our GCF. And when we factor, we get x minus 1. In our second binomial, we factored out a -1, so we put -1. -1x divided by -1 is a positive x, and a +1 divided by -1 is a -1. And I could see that these two terms that we factored out are the same. If they were different, you'd want to go back and check to see what you may have done wrong. And sometimes it's because you didn't factor out the actual greatest common factor. Or you should have factored out a negative, but you factored out a positive. There's different possibilities. All right, so I'm going to put these two together in one binomial, 3x minus 1. And then I'm going to put these two together in a binomial, x minus 1. And that's our final answer. So example 1, they were both positive. Example 2, they're both negative. And example 3, because our third term is a negative, that means that you will always have one negative and one positive. All right, just remember that. If your third term is positive, that means that either your two terms are going to be positive or your two terms will be negative. So in this case, we have to find factors of -20 that give us a -1. Okay, so we could put a -1 right there just to help us with that. So we have 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. And I can already tell that 4 and 5 are going to be our factors, because if we were to subtract that, we get a 1. But what we have to ask ourselves is, which number needs to be negative, the 4 or the 5? Well, if our number is negative, that means our bigger number has to be negative. If our number were positive, then our bigger number would have to be positive. So in this case, our 5 has to be negative. So we have a +4 and a -5. So let's go ahead and break this down. 10x squared, we bring that down. Okay. And then we're going to separate -1x into +4x and -5x. And then we bring down our -2. Okay. Now let's break these down into two binomials. Now, normally I would actually put the -5 over here so that I didn't have to remember to factor out a negative, but um, it doesn't really matter. So in the first binomial, I'm going to factor out, what's my GCF? Does anyone know? 2x, yep. So I'm going to factor out a 2x. Now in my second binomial, this one's different. There's no obvious GCF. So does anyone know what I would factor out? A -1. If you don't see a GCF, then it's going to be a 1. In this case, it has to be a -1 because my first term is negative. Okay. So we end up with 2x, our GCF, and when we factor this, we get 5x plus 2. And the next one, our GCF was -1, and when we factor it, we get 5x plus 2. Because -5x divided by -1 is a positive 5x, and -2 divided by -1 is a positive 2. And these two are the same. So we were correct. So let's go ahead and write this out. We have 2x minus 1 and 5x minus 2, or plus 2. And remember, just like in the other homework assignments, it doesn't matter which binomial you put first. Okay. So what I would like for you to do is I would like for you to work with your partner on the practice problems on the right, and then we'll check them. So I'm going to pause the video, and when we come back, you will see the answers on the screen. Okay, so go ahead and check practice 1. Here's practice 2. All right, here's practice 3. On this lesson, I'm only having you guys do 1 through 18. And then lesson 7.6 is 1 through 34. I'll look at that and see about adjusting it. Okay, let's go ahead and go to page 2. Look at this big note. Sometimes you will need to factor out the GCF first. So this adds an element to the problem. And the thing is when you factor out your GCF, you need to make sure you keep it with you the whole time and you don't lose it at some point. I'm noticing on your homework for 7.2 and 0.3 that when you factored out the GCF, you either just factored out the GCF and didn't do any more work, or you factored it out and just wrote the factored out answer. But what you need to do is you need to take that GCF and write it on the outside of the parentheses. So I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. So the GCF for 4 is 6. So let's factor that out. Okay. And when you write your final answer, it's not just 6. And it's not just 5x squared minus 8x plus 3, which is what a lot of you did. You have to take the GCF and put it in front of the parentheses. It's 6. Okay. So make sure that you're doing that because it's wrong if you don't. Okay. Now, what we do with this problem is we solve it just like we did on the other side. So the only difference was we factored out a GCF first. If you forget to do that, look what you would have to do. You would have to multiply 18 times 30, which is not a pretty number. It's 540, and then you would have to find factors of 540 that equaled 48 or -48. You don't want to do that. Look at how much easier this is. We're going to find factors of 15 that give us a -8. Now, you should be able to see that automatically it's 3 and 5. And because it's a -8, it's going to be -3 and -5. Okay. So let's go ahead and finish solving this just like we did before. Do not forget the 6 though. Okay, so I'm going to take this 6 and I'm going to put it in parentheses. I'm going to bring down my 5x squared, and then I'm going to separate my -8 into two parts, a -3x and a -5x. Now I'm going to put my -5 first because I can, those are two common factors there. Then I'm going to put my -3x and then bring down my +3. Okay. Now I'm going to group them together. And I'm going to factor out my GCF. So in the first binomial, it's 5x. In the second binomial, what is that? What's the GCF? -3. Good. Okay. So let's go ahead. Do not forget the 6. Okay. We have 5x and then x minus 1. Look at all this. Look at all these parts that are moving. And it's really important that you take up a lot of space and you write neatly. Otherwise, you're going to forget something. Then we have a -3, x minus 1. So we have these two, which are the same. Then we have these two. But then you also have, I want a yellow. You also have this right here that you do not want to forget. Okay, don't forget that. So when we write our final answer, we have 6 parentheses 5x minus 3 and then parentheses x minus 1. Some students like to just leave this up here and try to remember at the end to add it. That's okay as long as you remember. Okay, because sometimes bringing the 6 down can get confusing. All right, any questions? Okay, let's do example 5. What is our GCF there? 3. Okay. So I'm going to take out that 3, factor it out. Okay. And now I have to find factors of 42 that give me a -23. So this one might take a minute or not. Depends on what you put down here, right? Uh, Now I already see it. Yep, 2 and 21. And they both have to be negative because we have a -23. Okay. So I'm going to bring down my 3. And I have 6x squared. And then I'm going to break my -23 into two parts, a -2x and a -21x, and then plus 7. Okay. Now I'm going to group into two binomials. And I'm going to divide my first binomial by 2x and my second binomial by a -7. So keeping this 3 with me, I have 2x times 3x minus 1. I have a -7 times 3x minus 1. Okay. So we don't want to forget our GCF right here. And we have 2x and -7 that go together. And we have a 3x minus 1 that goes together. All right. I want you to do practice 4 and practice 5, and don't let practice 5 confuse you. Is there a GCF on practice 5? No. So you just do it regularly. So I'm going to pause the video so you have time to work on that, and then we'll come back and check. Okay, here you go. Go ahead and check practice 4. All right, let's go down to practice 5. Did anyone try this one? Yeah? You're almost done with it? What were the two factors of negative 49 that would give you a negative 50? Okay. So which one would have to be negative because it's a negative 49? One would have to be negative. So if I take negative 1 plus 49, I get a 48. Okay, so negative 1 minus 49, it gives me a negative 50, but negative 1 times a negative 49 gives me a positive 49. Not so, but it's a negative. So what do you guys think? It's prime. You cannot factor this. This is not factorable. This is as far as it would go. So we would call this prime. Okay. Good. All right, let's go to page 3. Okay, so page 3, we're just dealing with some negatives at the beginning. So I put these on here just to remind you that if the first term is negative, you must always factor out a negative. So in this first one, the GCF is a negative 5. Okay. So when you factor this out, you're going to have a negative 5 on the outside, and then 2x squared minus 3x minus 5. You want, yeah, you just want to factor out that negative. Okay. And so then we find factors of negative 10 that give us a negative 3. Okay. So I have 2 and 5. Which one's negative? 5. So, and then you solve this one like normal. What I'm going to have you do, because the rest of these are the same as what we've been doing, is I want you to go ahead and work on the rest of these on your own as practice, and then we're going to come back and check them. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video for right now. Okay, so here's example and practice 6. I want you to check your answers. Okay, on example 6, okay, say instead of taking out a negative 4, okay, I'm going to rewrite this, and I'm just going to show you what you can do. If you ended up taking out a negative 2, okay, and you would have had negative 2, and then 6x squared minus 40x plus 24. And then you realize, oh, I could take out another 2. You can take out another 2 and just multiply that 2 by what you've already done. Okay. Or if you get to the end and you realize, oh, I can still factor something out, you can do it at the end as well. You want to try to do it at the beginning to make sure your numbers are a little bit smaller to work with. Okay. Anyone still working on example and practice 7? Okay. Okay, here's number 7, practice and example 7. Okay. All right, so that concludes lesson 7.4, factoring when x is not equal to 1. Right?